We're so excited that you're able to take some time today to join us for this very important presentation. So welcome to this webinar hosted by the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute and really from our early childhood team. We are the ones that had met and really wanted to have a conversation or have a presentation that focused on intimate partner violence and the impact on children. And we are so honored that Dr. Lise Milne is able to join us today for this presentation. My name is Jackie Eaton, and I am the Community Action Program for Children, or CAPC, Training and Education Coordinator, and I work at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. Before we begin, I just have a couple of housekeeping things I want to mention. As you were joining, you should have got a notification that this presentation is being recorded, and we will be sending out the recording to all of the registrants. All of the participants are currently muted. So if you have any questions, please use the chat. If there's any technical issues, or if you wish to connect with any of the other participants, use the chat. But if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Milne is graciously allowed for me to share her slides. So when I send out the recording link, I will also send her slides for everyone to review. And if anyone is wishing to turn off the chat is such a great function, but I know many people don't like having that ongoing scroll. You are able to turn chat off by just clicking the little arrow beside the chat button. You'll see a little statement that says show chat previews. If you click on that so the arrow comes off, those will disappear. So now, to get us started in a good way, I just want to take a moment for everybody to ground themselves and think about what the land means to you. For this webinar, I am honored to be on Treaty 6 in the homeland of the Métis. But as I mentioned, I work at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, and we are a provincial organization. So we provide services to those on treaty lands 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, the ancestral territories of the Nahiawuk, Nahithawuk, Nahinawuk, Ananeshbek, Nekaway, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis. We recognize that these lands are currently inhabited by Indigenous peoples from all across Turtle Island, including many other First Nations and Inuit peoples, and acknowledge the importance of the treaties, the lasting impacts of colonialization, and the continued inequities. We are dedicated to moving forward on a shared path of reconciliation and partnership. We are all treaty people and are grateful to live, work, and play on this land. So I invite you to take a moment to consider the land that you are currently participating from and reflect on what that land means to you. And for me, I always find when we have these presentations or have conversations around things to help children thrive, it's really important for me to acknowledge where I am, where I've come from, and all those that I have learned from. And so just take a moment and think about what the land means to you. So I am so delighted on how many of you are able to join us today. We've had an amazing response, and I recognize many people's names, but I also am thrilled that we have so many new people. And so I am going to share a short video just to introduce the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. And hopefully the sound all works on this.
Think about the role you play in creating environments and opportunities that support children, youth, and families. As a provincial nonprofit organization, we support service providers, educators, and communities to increase the health and well-being of children, from preconception through childhood. At the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, this vision has guided us since 1980. We offer more than just information. Our unique approach turns research and evidence into practical, easy-to-use resources that will inform your work and can be shared with families and communities. We also provide education and training opportunities on a wide range of topics to help you stay at the forefront of best practices in your field. Visit us online to learn more about how we can support you in building healthier communities across Saskatchewan.
Imagine a world where every child grows up healthy, safe, and able to achieve their full potential.
Our goal is healthy children.
Right. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Lise Milne. Dr. Milne is an associate professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Regina and the Child Trauma Research Center Chair in Intervention and Prevention. She's also a faculty associate with the Social Policy Research Center and the McGill Center for Research on Children and Families. Dr. Milne leads the trauma research incubator Thrive Lab and is actively involved in several national partnerships focused on child and youth trauma. Her research centers on trauma and resilience-informed practices, as well as the neurobiological impacts of trauma, intimate partner violence, and effective prevention and policy approaches. Her work is grounded in over 15 years of child welfare practice across 2 provinces. We are honored that you are all here today to explore the far-reaching consequences of intimate partner violence on children who witness or are exposed to it. Thank you for sharing this information with us. Dr. Milne, I pass it on to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Just going to share my screen here. How's that?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, well, thank you again for this introduction, Jackie. What an amazing organization SBI is. And thank you also for beginning the day walking us in a good way. Today, I'm actually coming to you as a descendant of settler colonists from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, home of the Métis Nation. I just want to mention the turnout today is so impressive. And I can't even imagine the collective knowledge and wisdom that this virtual space holds for us today. And thanks for sharing your time with me. And I hope you can share some of your insights and expertise with the group through our chat and our Q&A, which we'll be doing at the end of the presentation. And I see that many of you have introduced yourselves, but I would love for those of you who haven't to do so. And at the risk of sounding cheesy, if you want to mention something that makes you happy today or whenever. We've been doing this lately for our meetings, and it does feel like a nice way to bring some light, some levity into what is otherwise really heavy material that many of us deal with, and that I'll be talking about today. So to build on what Jackie said, I just finished a 3-year term on the steering committee for Resolve Saskatchewan, which some of you may be familiar with, Research and Education for Solutions on Abuse and Violence. 2-year term as the academic rep for the Regional Council of Resolve. And, you know, I've just sort of came out of a co-chair position and a board position at the Saskatoon Sexual Assault and Information Center. So, you know, being a part of these organizations and part of large pan-Canadian initiatives related to gender-based violence and trauma and violence-informed care has been really, informative for my growth. So before we move on, I want to say that I came into this space, this area of research with curiosity, and I hope some humility to see what may have changed over the past few decades in regards to intimate partner violence. So as Jackie mentioned, I worked for 15 years in child protection, beginning way back in the early 90s as a frontline worker in Manitoba and then in Quebec. And at the time, I can tell you, I found cases involving intimate partner violence so challenging. And so the research I've been involved in and having worked with Resolve Saskatchewan and the Prairie Network has really helped me understand that intimate partner violence itself hasn't changed as much as our awareness of it. And our learning keeps evolving. I think of a great Maya Angelou quote where she says, when we know better, we need to do better. And so armed with new knowledge, and I hope, through research and practice learnings, we can continue to influence each other in positive ways. I also wanted to say that we all know many of our helping systems need changing, maybe even massive restructuring, as we see a little bit with child protection services. But I think it's important to respect how challenging it is to work in many of these helping systems where you're often damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so I think that to help change our systems, vilifying them has not been very helpful. In fact, over time, I think many of us have really come to understand how structural conditions, which are largely created through colonialism in Canada and elsewhere, have made intimate partner violence such a problem, and have led to a need to have, child protection services, law enforcement, to address the existence of the problem itself and to make up for the lack of services within our community. So we have many incredible community, not for profit, including SPI, even government organizations that respond to intimate partner violence. But to put it bluntly, we've done a really lousy job of investing enough in these resources that would have stopped many families from needing to come to the attention of child protection services in the first place. My rant is officially over. So, to give you a sense of what I'll be focusing on today, I'll be looking at the far reaching consequences of intimate partner violence on children who witness or are exposed to it. So, beyond the physical dangers, we'll delve into the emotional impacts, psychological, developmental, neurobiological, and economic impacts that can shape a child's future. And we'll look at how resilience and healing need to be considered when working with these children and families, and some treatment approaches for various ages. I'll highlight the need for a comprehensive public health approach that includes prevention, especially early intervention, supportive policies, and community-based solutions. And then finally, time permitting, I'll share some findings from an interesting study that we undertook on how child protection services responds to cases of intimate partner violence, really focusing on survivor narratives and how they can be understood within the exceptionally complex system that is related to intimate partner violence. So, as always, we should begin by defining intimate partner violence, which is often referred to as domestic violence and falls under the umbrella, the broader category of family violence. So, intimate partner violence is recognized as a critical social problem globally, even a public health crisis. Some are calling it an epidemic, affecting millions of individuals. And few would disagree that it is a pervasive issue that requires our urgent attention. So, as defined by the World Health Organization, intimate partner violence refers to any behavior by an intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm. And IPV can include not only physical and sexual assaults, but also various forms of coercive control, which is something that I'll talk about in more detail in a moment. So, the scope of the problem. So, the scope of IPV is huge. I mentioned it as a global problem. A recent systematic review and meta-analysis, so that's taking all the research that's been done and bringing all the findings together, of 201 studies from 46 countries on the global prevalence and outcomes of intimate partner violence among women, found that well over a third of women over the age of 16 I'm trying to change my language. I'm trying to be less passive. So had IPV perpetrated against them as opposed to experiencing them. And contrary to public perceptions that intimate partner violence is primarily physical violence, psychological abuse was actually the most common form of intimate partner violence. And we know that Canada is no exception. Rates here represent a significant public health concern. With over 100,000 reports to police back in 2021, so probably higher this year, accounting for a third of all violent crimes. So this is just staggering to hear. And IPV is especially concerning in the prairie provinces and territories, and alarmingly prevalent in the province of Saskatchewan, with a rate of 732 victim survivors per 100,000 people. And this, just to give you an idea, is double the national average. Nationally, the most common form of intimate partner violence is physical assault, followed by sexual assault, verbal threats, and criminal harassment. I think we can safely say, though, those of us that are, researching or working in this field, that coercive control is much more prevalent than we know. It can be extremely harmful. Just to sort of provide a bit of a background, it involves manipulating and dominating a survivor victim's life, stripping them of autonomy and freedom, and has impacts on children as well. Just to note that gender-related homicide of women and girls is also among the highest in Saskatchewan. But although these are really startling statistics to hear about, they actually still underestimate the true extent of the problem. As many as 80% of victim survivors in 2019 did not make police reports, and over 30% did not disclose the abuse to anyone in their circles. So the statistics we know are startling, and I, like you, have known many individuals who had violence perpetrated against them as children and or as adults. Yet they only really tell part of the story. It's essential, that we come together and understand the dynamics of intimate partner violence to address, this hidden toll on children, which we will explore in the coming slides. So I mentioned I would talk a little bit about coercive control. It's such a common and insidious feature of intimate partner violence. So this is something that we did not talk about, or I guess at minimum fully recognize when I was a frontline worker back in the 90s and 2000s. This type of abuse can be very subtle, very strategic, so much less obvious than physical violence. So, kind of an accepted definition of coercive control is a pattern of behavior that is typically characterized by intimidation, degradation, isolation, and control. And these tactics are used by the perpetrator and in conjunction often with severe physical and sexual violence or with low level physical abuse and sexual coercion. It's considered a form of ongoing oppression and even terrorism used to instill fear in survivors. So, examples could be tactics like isolating individuals from others, um, forcing them into very gender stereotypical roles, limiting their access to finances, restricting or monitoring communication, movement, gaslighting. We hear a lot about this. Turning children against the survivor, and many other means. So all of these really are ways to control, to create dependence upon individuals, but aren't always considered abusive. So researchers and domestic violence death reviews have identified coercive control as a severe and dangerous form of IPV, and an indicator of risk for lethality. However, individuals who perpetrate this form of IPV may not encounter the Canadian legal system, and in turn may not be referred to intervention programs unless other more physical forms of violence are also present. So therefore, we find a lot of perpetrators, if they are referred for supports, they tend to be intervention programs as a result of physical intimate partner violence, which of course is important, but we may be missing a huge portion of perpetrators. Children, as I mentioned, may experience coercive control used against them or their parent in the context of IPV. I think it's, what I want to highlight is that There are some organizations that have put out some absolutely fabulous information briefs in order to provide more information that's very specific to course of control impacts on children. So, for example, the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University just did an incredible job of exploring the characteristics in their briefs. And I'm just going to show you a couple of these examples. I would highly recommend you looking them up. And if you can't find them, please let me know and I can send them to you. So, before we get into the impacts of intimate partner violence on children, I wanted to make mention of some of the pervasive myths that surround the issue. So, these are described by several reputable organizations, such as the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, UN Women, Public Health Agency of Canada, and many, many others. So I'll give you a little break from my voice for just a minute, and I'll give you some time to read through some of these myths and what the actual, what the facts are in relation to these myths. And I'll move on to just a second set of myths here. So these are just a few of the myths and misperceptions that exist around intimate partner violence. So, we can dispel a lot of these myths by working together to change the rhetoric around intimate partner violence, to share our learnings with those around us. I don't know if you guys experience it, but I certainly do. People within your milieu, your family, even sometimes your friends, and to focus on what is really at the heart of intimate partner violence, which is power and control. And I just wanted to mention, I just came across this yesterday. I mean, listening to individuals who have so much power and control, ironically, like our Donald J. Trump, diminishing the gravity of intimate partner violence, which is all about power and control. Talking about a poor man who has a little fight with the wife at home and it's called a crime, and how, that shouldn't be. And, there are thousands of other nauseating examples of this minimization. And so our job definitely is to work together to educate as much as possible. So let's talk about how intimate partner violence affects children. IPV is considered a form of maltreatment in most Canadian legislation. So we did for a couple of the positions that I had and projects I undertook, we actually looked at the differences amongst the different provinces. And so whether it exists as a specific type of maltreatment in child welfare legislation or is referred to under another form of maltreatment, child protection response when cases come to their attention. And this can come across as either a primary form of maltreatment or a secondary form or even a third or tertiary form of maltreatment. And that is where we really see a lot of complexity when it is often associated with other types of abuse or neglect. So to give you a sense of the incidence rates, the most recent 2019 Canadian First Nations child abuse and neglect incident study collects information from cases opened in Canada in CPS organizations over a certain period of time. And they found very high rates of exposure to intimate partner violence. In fact, IPV exposure is the most commonly substantiated form of maltreatment. There were 36,000 investigated cases comprising well over a third of substantiated confirmed reports of child abuse or neglect in Canada. And we have seen those, excuse me, these numbers rise over the past couple of decades, pardon me. And this is largely due to the fact that we have just so much more awareness of it. Unfortunately, again, these numbers might underestimate the true extent of the problem. Canadian and provincial incident studies are limited. Only new or re-reported child welfare investigations during just a kind of a small 3-month period are captured, and don't include cases that are screened out, unreported, or only investigated by police. So, what is the definition of exposure to IPV? Well, it varies, but it usually involves a child witnessing, hearing, being involved in, or being aware of, and this is really important, intimate partner violence between their caregivers. Some have argued that children are so impacted by IPV that terms that we use, like witness or exposure, actually reduce them to passive observers of something rather than direct victims of violence and abuse. And this is critical because even indirect exposure to intimate partner violence, so the child isn't present during the violent incidents, can be harmful. And it's also associated with the intergenerational cycle of abuse and trauma. So here again, this meta-analysis took together the findings from tens of thousands of participants from 27 studies and 41 samples, and found a positive association between adverse childhood experiences and both perpetration of IP victimization against the individual or perpetration of the violence themselves in adulthood. Numerous studies have reported on the devastating effects of exposure to intimate partner violence, and these are really at the intersection of developmental and environmental variables, so psychological, behavioral, physiological, physical health, social, emotional, cognitive, intellectual, and economic. And I'm just going to provide a bit of a caveat here that not all individuals who experience adversity, including IPV, will have these impacts. And so I just want to make sure that we understand this, but many, many do. And we can see these impacts literally across the lifespan. So as early as during pregnancy, all the way into adulthood. So going through the stages during the perinatal and prenatal phase, pregnant women are at increased risk of intimate partner violence. Prenatally, an infant's functioning is indirectly impacted by exposure to intimate partner violence. So this could be due to the parent's distress during pregnancy. So there's this sort of biological embedding of chronic stress, which can lead to a release of from the expectant caregiver and the overproduction of cortisol within the fetus and other neurohormones, which really impact all of these interconnected biological systems within the body. They can also impact the parent's warmth and caregiving once the child is born. So, in the same vein, continued exposure likely interferes with an infant or toddler's attachment relationship. So, this is where we'll see some of the disorganized, insecure attachment. And we can see how intimate partner violence can lead to prolonged difficulties across these childhood years. During infancy and toddlerhood, some researchers have found that witnessing intimate partner violence is one of the most common forms of violence during infancy, toddler, and during preschool. And then we know that youth are impacted during adolescence. So this is important because it's the developmental period where the ongoing cycle of violence really starts emerging. So this is where we hear about dating violence and peer aggression. Before we get into the specific impacts, as I mentioned earlier, I do want to remind us that we will be focusing on resilience and healing a little bit later to demonstrate how these can be buffers to adversity and to hopefully sort of end this section on a little bit more of a positive, optimistic note. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about qualitative research. This is, I think, really important because of the profound impacts it has had on children. So this is a meta synthesis. So I keep bringing up meta, but this is taking all of, not all, but much of the qualitative research that's undertaken directly with children and adolescents together. So asking about their experiences of domestic and family violence. And what they found was that children experience intimate partner violence as complex, isolating. They face disruptions and losses, which really can affect their relationships deeply. And it's crucial to understand how fear, worry, powerless, and sadness can really pervade their experiences. And we don't always see it, or we might see it as being representative or manifested in different ways that aren't as obvious. Moreover, children develop strategies for safety and emotional well-being, and this is really heartbreaking. It's not only for themselves, but for their family members, including their caregivers. So, as we consider these impacts, we can reflect on how we can better support children who endure these hardships. Really working towards ensuring that they feel safe, that they feel heard within our communities. And I do want to give a shout out here to the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, who've done just a fabulous job of undertaking some literature reviews. So again, for those of you who I would encourage you to go to the website and download this publication. And then they also look specifically at IPV during pregnancy, which I think is just a really understudied, under-discussed topic. And again, PATHS, the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan, fabulous work in the area of intimate partner violence. And they have this great list of common reactions of children exposed to violence. And borrowing from them, I'm going to go through some of them here with you. So many profound psychological and emotional impacts. So first, we want to consider the isolation these children feel. So they might struggle to connect with peers or adults due to the complex emotions that they're processing. We see children grappling with feeling responsible for the violence and abuse. And, this very misplaced sense of responsibility can lead to kind of feelings of helplessness, making it really challenging for them to seek help or even to recognize that they need or deserve support. We can't overlook the medical problems that arise from stress and trauma, which can have long-term effects on their health. And also the fear of being abandoned is a very real concern for many of these children. And this fear can manifest in various emotional and behavior problems, really complicating their development and day-to-day interactions. And I'll just add that, some of the impacts on children are that they're actually, separated from their perhaps abusing caregiver, but also their non-offending caregiver. We know that there's still a lot of victim blame, and even if it's for protection of them, we know that this can have profound impacts on children. So continuing on, there's the obvious fear of physical harm, and there is a relationship between exposure and physical harm against the child. Again, not just to themselves, but possibly to loved ones. And this fear can be deeply ingrained and affect their daily behaviors. Sadly, many children feel pessimism about the future. So when they're constantly exposed to negative environments, they could really struggle to envision a positive or hopeful future for themselves. And this can lead to a diminished sense of purpose or even of motivation in their lives. Additionally, we hear of children developing eating and sleeping disorders. And these are really often physical manifestations of the stress and anxiety that they're experiencing. And, again, we really want to make sure that we're recognizing these signs as potential indicators of deeper issues. And finally, we can't overlook the emotional impacts such as depression and guilt, or the coping mechanisms like detachment and denial. Many of these kids actually fantasize about living kind of a normal life, really highlighting their desire to have stable home lives and to experience peace that may be something that they see of some of their peers and others around them. So I'd like to get into a little bit of a discussion about the neurobiology of trauma and the brain because understanding these impacts is vital in terms of understanding that the neurobiology of trauma is how we can explain and understand these impacts that I just described. So I'll start a little bit with the basics of the brain, how it develops, and how it can be impacted as a result of traumatic experiences. So first, in exploring the brain's complexity and plasticity, and I'm borrowing a lot of this from Dr. Bruce Perry. I've been several years in the training for, if some of you are aware of the neurosequential model of therapeutics. It's not quite as complicated as it sounds, but it is taking some time for me to get through the material. Um, we can start understanding the brain as the from the least to the most complex. So although the brain isn't always easy to draw to describe physically, we will sort of give it a try. So we'll begin with the brain stem. So that's kind of back here, which is the least complex. So what happens here is the neurons have to move, differentiate, and connect before other parts of the brain can develop. And then sort of moving up is the diencephalon, which is followed by the limbic system, and finally up here in the front of our foreheads, the neocortex. And this area is the most complex and the most plastic, meaning it changes as a response to experience. So the key takeaway here is that the brain develops in a sequential manner. Each stage builds upon the last, kind of like a carefully constructed puzzle. So understanding this sequence is critical because it sets the stage for understanding how disruptions, so adverse experiences, can impact overall brain functioning. So, for example, disruptions at the brainstem and diencephalon area can have a really cascading effect on brain functions, so altering the higher level systems. This is critical because these systems are where we see things like emotional regulation, attachment, and our ability to think and to make decisions. And this is where we often get frustrated with children. We don't understand why they're not listening. We don't understand why they're not making good decisions. We don't understand why they can't just settle and regulate themselves. So the point here is that adverse childhood events can literally alter the organization of the developing brain and can create a lifetime of vulnerability for children. So this is it's a nice but very oversimplified visual of our brains. So we just see down at the bottom, the brainstem is our core regulation functions. Then we move up to the diencephalon, which is where we have state regulation and motor control. And I'll give you a few more details in a moment. Our limbic system is our emotional regulation, our attachment, and how we relate and connect with others. And then our neocortex is our ability to think concretely, think abstractly, and to have good executive functioning, kind of what we call this captain of the cognitive ship. So making choices, thinking things through. So much of what happens at each of these stages is really crucial to consider with survivors of traumatic experiences like exposure to IPV, because children's presentations and behaviors will usually reflect where their development was at the time of the abuse. And if it's chronic, it can be even more challenging. So I just want to make a quick reference to nature versus nurture. So we just talked about how the brain develops and in what order. I'd like to go just a bit off course to talk about this debate that we've all heard about. Is who we are the result of nature, or is it the result of nurture? So how we're cared for. It's an interesting question, but can be a little damaging because it distracts us from a more complex understanding of the brain. So genetics are very important at birth, but what we become depends on how experiences shape our genes. So we have all this genetic potential, but we require experiences and opportunities to reach our potential. And by the same token, um, positive experiences we don't get, or adverse experiences that we do get. And these can have serious impacts on how we develop. What's critical to remember when we're working with kids is that the vast majority of brain development takes place very early on in life. And I'll show you this in just a moment. So I mentioned that I would describe a little bit more about how trauma can affect our brains and our bodies. So early traumatic experiences like exposure to IPV or direct physical assaults can lead to problems integrating and processing sensation, feelings, which is how we regulate our emotions, how we learn, how we behave, and really just our overall participation in daily life. It can impact our state regulations. So sleeping, feeding, self-soothing, our tactile defensiveness. So for example, being overly sensitive to touch. And we see that with a lot of little ones who've been traumatized. And altered core regulation functions like breathing, cardiovascular systems, and our temperature regulation. So, aligned with the idea of how important experiences are, there are definitely windows of opportunity and windows of vulnerability that make these experiences, or as I mentioned earlier, lack thereof, so critical. So, at birth, the majority of our brain neurons are already present, setting the stage for rapid growth. And really, in those early stages, that's where the most rapid brain growth occurs. An infant's brain consumes a significant amount of energy, about 65% of their total calories. And this is in contrast to our mature, hopefully fully developed brains, which take only about 18%. So again, this highlights the immense activity and growth occurring in these early years. And then by age 4, a brain's for a child reaches 90% of its adult size. So again, just really considering how important these early years are. And our research, decades and decades of research, has affirmed that this is by far the most critical time for shaping the brain's future. So these, early years offer windows of both opportunity and, as I mentioned, vulnerability that can significantly influence their developmental trajectory. So to kind of move on with this, we can explore the concept of biological relativity. So really what this tells us is that the impact of events and experiences is most significant on the part of the brain that is actively developing at a certain stage or changing. And we call these hot zones. So if we consider kids who've endured traumatic events, particularly complex or developmental trauma that can include intimate partner violence exposure, these experiences can drastically change many, if not all, areas of the child's functioning. So this understanding helps highlight the need for supportive interventions during these critical phases. Again, let's talk prevention. Let's talk early intervention to aid in, healthier brain development and overall well-being of our children. And I just want to show you this very quickly, this chart about how the brain develops, which regions develop, at which phase we see the most developmental activity, when it's mature, and what some of the key functions are. And then I just want to show you this chart because I find this really, really fascinating. So this basically talks about what the impact is for 6 months of experiences on one's functioning. So if we look here, 6 months of experiences for a 1-year-old child has an impact factor of 250,000. And these are sort of abstract numbers, but just to give you kind of a sense. And at a 40-year-old, for example, or like me, almost 60-year-old, has an impact factor of 60. So to put it in perspective, 6 months in the life of a 1-year-old child has a over 4,000-fold greater impact than as an adult. So really important for us to be focusing on this phase. And then we want to distinguish between a healthy developing brain and what that has been impacted by trauma. So I don't like using the word healthy, but maybe a non-trauma impacted child's brain. Their brains are structured to work with their bodies to respond effectively to fearful situations. So you've probably heard a little bit about this when they perceive danger. Our healthy brain will help us react quickly, and this is really critical for survival. Now, contrast this with a trauma impacted child who is frequently faced with danger. And this constant exposure leads to either an overload of stress hormones, or conversely, we can see extremely low levels. And we see, these fight, flight, fawn, freeze responses as a result. And over time, this excessive or insufficient hormone production can adversely affect one's brain development. So understanding these differences is really vital as we consider the broader implications and costs associated with trauma that we'll explore in just a moment. We won't show this because we won't have the time, but many of you have probably seen this. If you haven't, I would highly recommend this TED Talk. This is just a phenomenal individual. She's Nadine Burke-Harris, a Canadian-American pediatrician who was the Surgeon General of California since 2019, and just an excellent, excellent video talking about ACEs and their impacts. So the last impact of intimate partner violence that I wanted to talk about is the significant financial impact of interpersonal and other forms of violence, such as IPV. While there isn't a universally agreed upon dollar figure, the costs are staggering and multifaceted. So first, we have to consider that victim survivors face numerous expenses like medical costs, lost wages, property damage, and not to mention those more intangible yet very real costs like pain and suffering, especially in their attempts to protect their children, which I will return to momentarily. Secondly, third parties are also affected. So our social services like shelters and crisis lines, many of you probably work within these within these areas, are exceptionally costly. Employers also see lost productivity. And we also need to consider the profound impact on children and their potential loss of future earnings. In regards to the justice system, which in studies we see kind of encompasses those police systems, courts, corrections, civil justice, dealing with divorces, protection orders, child protection cases. Hundreds of millions, if not billions, are spent each year. Just as an aside, it's important to recognize Canada plays a key role in reporting these statistics. So I think we need to really put pressure to make sure we always have up-to-date information because, sometimes it's the dollars that make the most impact when we're talking about policy changes. So by understanding these broad impacts, we can better appreciate the urgency for effective policy and practice changes, which we will delve into in a moment. I want to just return for a moment to intangible costs. About 74% of the costs have been estimated as intangible, so covering pain and suffering or loss in quality of life. So this, isn't just about numbers, it's about real people, infants, children, adolescents, their caregivers, and their experiences. And this burden is shared widely. So victims bear significant costs, including what I referred to as lost wages, personal trauma. Governments contribute through justice and social services, and the broader society incurs costs through lost productivity and impacts on children. So it's really, we're not talking about a private issue. It's a social issue, but it's also a profound economic issue. So prevention, supporting victim survivors offers us not just moral benefits, but financial and societal payoffs as well. And so, because of this complexity, we need to really collectively come together in terms of responding. So I promised I'd add maybe a teeny bit of lightness here by talking about resilience and healing, particularly for children exposed to intimate partner violence. So resilience has become like kind of like trauma has become the T word. Resilience has become the R word, and I think it's a bit overused. Um, but I do think there's been a lot of strides in how we are conceptualizing resilience. We used to look at it as a very individual, very a fixed trait, but it's actually a dynamic process that's deeply influenced by supportive environments. So when kids feel safe and secure, they're able to calm their nervous systems, learning that they're safe and that they're protected. And this physiological calming is crucial to allow for optimal emotional and cognitive development. Next, emotional regulation is a really critical skill that can be supported through resilience enhancement strategies. So, supportive caregivers and therapeutic interventions can help kids learn to name their emotions, to understand their body sensations, and to develop coping strategies. And this is really vital for them to kind of counteract the chaos and the fear that they may have or may be experiencing. And then thinking back to the impacts on brain development and how chronic stress can disrupt neural pathways, positive relationships and consistent caregiving can help rebuild these. So this again enables the brain to heal, to make stronger neural connections, and to enhance executive functioning. So these abilities to think and make decisions. So focus again on supportive relationships as the absolute foundation for trust and secure attachment. Children learn that not all relationships are dangerous, and I think we know that this can help foster trust and really improve psychological health. And then finally, I think we have a bit of a juvenoia piece, or this idea that children aren't capable of having input into decisions made about them, but empowering children by involving them in decisions about their care can really build a sense of agency and identity. So these resilience kind of building environments can be transformative, offering children really a chance to heal and to thrive. I don't know how we got here. One moment, please. Somehow I skipped way ahead. My apologies. Okay, sorry about that. So, just to continue on resilience and healing, making sense of the violence is really critical. So it helps reduce self-blame and confusion, providing clarity and relief for children. So therapeutic supports such as play therapy, trauma-focused approaches, and body-based approaches are effective in helping kids process trauma. So I'm going to talk about that just in a few minutes. The bottom line is that healing nurtures safety, nurtures connection, which are essential for resilience. So, with the right supports, kids can adapt, recover, and ultimately even thrive after experiencing intimate partner violence. Kind of the tagline of our trauma labs for research is moving from surviving to thriving. And I think this is really critical. We really want to move beyond this into actually thriving. So I'll just talk for a moment about a few approaches that could be used in treatment, and this certainly doesn't cover the gamut, but there is quite a wide breadth and depth. Many ways to support kids and youth. What I do want to say is that the less formalized, that are focused on relationship building, can be just as important, if not more important, than some of these very trauma specialized specific services. So some of these include trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and this is always the kind of gold star, most evidence-based. So it's highly effective when a non-offending caregiver is involved in the therapy as well. And it really focuses on emotion regulation, trauma processing, and coping skills. And I want to make mention that these talk type therapies, cognitive type therapies may not be appropriate for kids who are just not able to verbalize or who don't have that cognitive capacity. Child parent psychotherapy is designed for our youngest kids, so those ages 0 to 5. So this really focuses on repairing attachment disruptions, which we know is really vital after experiencing trauma. And so this focuses on strengthening the caregiver-child relationship, repairing these disruptions, and helping both understand to the extent that it's possible for the child and process some of the traumatic events. So it's really, again, excellent for young children who have been exposed to IPV. Play therapy allows children to express emotions through play, providing a safe space for them to process their experiences and feelings of fear and of confusion and of grief to really rebuild a sense of control and of safety. So the nice thing about play therapy is that it can include non-directive, so child-led therapy, and then also directive forms where the therapist kind of leads the play. So this again is useful for younger children who find it easier to express emotions through play rather than through words. Art therapy offers an outlet for children who find it hard to verbalize their trauma, supporting emotional expression, trauma processing, and being able to regulate their senses. It helps children who struggle to verbalize their traumatic experiences, and again, is really beneficial for school-age children. And some of you may have heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing for children. And this is really focused on reducing trauma symptoms and processing distressing memories to decrease hyperarousal. And you've probably heard a little bit either ways of where they move their eyes in different directions, led by the therapist, or some tapping and sound type of therapeutic approaches. Um, and somatic or body-based approaches recognize that trauma often manifests in the body. And I'm seeing a lot of movement towards this type of approach, not only with children, but with adults, even those who do have an ability to, express themselves verbally and who have good cognitive capacities. Um, these approaches recognize that trauma often manifests in the body, offering methods to regulate our nervous systems, to reduce that hypervigilance that is so characteristic of impacts of trauma, and to increase grounding and a sense of safety. So some examples could include trauma-informed mindfulness and yoga, sensory motor psychotherapy, and child-friendly grounding techniques. So really helping kids feel like they're able to ground themselves in that particular moment. I'll just talk about a couple more. Group therapy provides a community of peers who can really understand each other's experiences. And this can be incredibly validating. So, I'm not the only one. It can really help building social and emotional skills, teaches some safety planning, which I think is really critical, and to give the message that violence is not their fault. And this is often delivered, some of you probably offer this within shelters or community agencies. Family therapy I really want to say it has to be when it's safe and appropriate. This can be really helpful for rebuilding trust and communication. And again, we don't want the abuser to be present in the home. We need it to be safe. This is especially important when children remain in kind of unstable or transitional situations. So this can help focus on building coping skills, stabilization, emotional support, and providing safety strategies, really dependent upon the child's age and context within the family therapy setting. So in situations where stability is a concern, supportive counseling and safety planning can offer really critical emotional support and coping strategies. So this is used only if there's no ongoing risk of violence, and can support communication, conflict resolution skills, rebuilding trust, and really importantly, reestablishing family roles and some of those boundaries that were impacted during the violence. School-based interventions are vital. Schools can be, and we know kids spend so much of their time there. They can be a really protective environment where trauma and violence-informed practices can help children thrive. So this can include trauma-informed school counseling, social emotional learning programs, and even things like check-in and check-out systems with kids, and curriculum that is focused on safe and healthy relationships. If you're allowed to have that included within your schools, which was actually halted in Saskatchewan, and I think maybe even Alberta. Finally, culturally grounded and Indigenous healing approaches respect and incorporate cultural practices, fostering what we hope is a sense of identity and belonging. This can include elder involvement, it can include land-based, nature-based healing, ceremonial uh, events, storytelling, traditional teachings, and just providing this overall community support within Indigenous communities. So just to close this off, it's important that we choose the right approach for each child. Each plays a unique role tailored to the child's age, experiences, and cultural background to foster this healing and resilience that we know is absolutely critical for kids who've faced this type of adverse experience. So I will close off this section by talking a little bit about prevention as a public health response. These approaches are quite similar across gender-based violence issues, so sexual violence and other forms of violence. A comprehensive public health approach to intimate partner violence prevention really has to incorporate universal selective strategies that address risk factors and promote protective factors at various levels. So this will really help us broaden our understanding, or the public, the general public's understanding and response to intimate partner violence. Because we know this is not an individual, a familial, or even a distinct community issue. I'll repeat this, it's a major public health issue, crisis, epidemic. I think they're all true. So prevention in general can be categorized into three distinct levels. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. I'm going to start with primary, although we see mostly tertiary. So primary prevention is about stopping intimate partner violence before it starts. So really creating environments and systems that I feel like I'm talking about a fantasy world, but we must live there in our brains to keep hope alive. That to really deter abuse from ever occurring. Some of these strategies could include education and awareness. So, as I mentioned earlier, healthy relationship education in schools, youth programs, or workplaces. I think this is absolutely huge. Public campaigns and media approaches that address gender norms, power, coercion, and stigma. This is really critical. Skill building around communication, conflict resolution, and really just learning emotional regulation skills for youth and adults. Another really important one is bystander intervention training. So much of what happens is witnessed by others, and there's often very little kind of intervention by these folks who just feel really uncomfortable about stepping in. And then on a larger scale, kind of that community and structural change. So policies promoting gender equity and nonviolence. And I just want to say, like, how are we raising our little boys, especially? We really need to be focusing on that. So we need to look as well at economic stability programs like income supports, childcare, employment training, community engagement to promote norms of respect and equality with one another. And then those early childhood supports that many of these wonderful organizations provide, home visiting programs, education programs, that sort of nurse family partnership program, parent education, and positive parenting supports. And then just moving into secondary prevention. So this is really targeting individuals who might be at risk of offending. So what we want to do is we want to provide them with the interventions needed as early as possible to alter their kind of potential trajectories towards violence. So this could include screening and early detection in healthcare, in child welfare, mental health, even prenatal care and schools to identify warning signs and high risk situations like stalking, threats, and again, referring back to coercive control, which, by the way, is considered a crime in the UK. Immediate safety supports, safety planning, emergency shelter access. We know how challenging that can be. Risk assessments, so danger assessments, crisis lines and rapid response services, and really just targeted supports for individuals who are at risk. So this could be brief counseling and interventions as well. And I think what we want to do is, as much as I'm saying perpetrator and, these violent individuals, I think we all need to understand these are people who are using violence. And, by us being overly vilifying of them, I think that can really impact their willingness to talk about, to open up, and to be a part of programs. And finally, tertiary prevention. So this is sort of another word for intervention, although what it does do is it prevents more abuse from occurring. It plays a really pivotal role in responding to offenses that have already happened. So some strategies could be long-term survivor support. So some of those therapies I described earlier, housing stability programs, financial empowerment programs, legal advocacy and long-term safety planning, going back to interventions for people who use violence, perpetrator intervention programs. So I just talked about shelters, but I mean where the jury is not out. We know that we need more of those. And so, these include evidence-informed approaches that really stress accountability and behavior change. And we see this a lot in the Safe and Together model that has become increasingly used in Canada and elsewhere. Mental health and substance use treatment when relevant. And again, going back to that myths chart, it's not a cause, but it can be a contributing factor. And, really helpful child protection interventions. I'll talk about that very briefly before closing off. And long-term case management and wraparound supports. Finally, probably the most important again, how our community and our systems are responding. So we really need these coordinated community response models. So if it's okay, Jackie, I'll just talk until about 11:15, just to give you a few of our takeaways. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but we undertook a study with child protection that I referred to earlier, and I thought I'd just give you a few of our findings. So the study was called Better Understanding How Child Protection Services Responds to Cases of Intimate Partner Violence. So what we wanted to do really with this study was to see what efforts could be made to understand these serious and long-lasting issues related to IPV's impacts, especially on children, which I just talked about. So this was a 4-year project, emerged, delayed due to COVID, but we finally completed, that included 4 provinces. So we had Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario included. And so I just, wanted to make mention again about these kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't systems. And I really appreciate this quote, that we echo the words of these individuals, that, our research was undertaken with deep respect for social work and child protection, really in the abiding hope of improving the quality of decisions made about children who live with violence. And so very quick and skinny. We wanted to look at Canadian policy and practices regarding IPV, and just to have just a better understanding about how do our child protection systems respond. And because of who we included in the study as participants, we also found a lot more about how our collateral systems and supports respond and how they feel they're working with child protection. And so what we really were trying to ultimately do was identify some gaps and to develop usable practice frameworks that we could implement. So instead of just talking about the problem, actually really doing something about it. So we undertook a national policy scan. I will show you the webpage later. I won't get into this, but certainly have a look at that. It was quite interesting. We undertook interviews with child protection worker survivors. So I'm just focusing here on the Saskatchewan component because this is an SPI webinar. But I'll tell you upfront that our findings across the country were quite similar. We did a survey with us child protection frontline workers, and I'll say we had the best response rate in the country in Saskatchewan. We undertook focus groups with frontline workers to kind of get a richer sense of their experiences. We interviewed collateral supports because we know IPV involving children cannot be addressed solely through child protection. We looked at these supports from different sectors, and this included law enforcement, victim services, newcomer settlement agencies, and emergency shelters. And last but absolutely not least, we conducted interviews with survivors. And unfortunately, we only had three participants, and I'll share just a few of those findings in a moment. Very quickly, far more females than males. And then the majority of our sample was caseworkers. And we also wanted to get a sense of hang on one second. There we go. What the previous education and training was like for these workers. So this was quite a well-educated group in terms of most holding a Bachelor of Social Work degree, which is really a requirement for most of these types of positions. But it is striking that over a third had received no training in regards to intimate partner violence in particular. Only 13% had attended an in-depth training, so kind of more than 7 hours, and only about 20% had completed a university or college course on intimate partner violence. So we first undertook a survey with child protection workers that we adapted from a survey that is often used with doctors. And then I'm just probably, for the interest of time, I'm going to skip to the end to just really talk about what our overall findings were for the surveys. But what I wanted to show you also was that we undertook a okay, well, so here I'll back up a moment here. So our overall research themes were this. So really finding the need for more training across sectors. We all know about high staff over, and especially in child protection, and how there are many other barriers and consequences to that. And just that whole notion of child protection services as, the place where people show up at your door and take away your child, it absolutely happens. But I think there is there are some negative public misconceptions about the system. And then that age-old kind of burden of responsibility that's placed on survivors. And then also this insufficient infrastructure, just not enough community supports and resources, and their ability to really work together in collaboration and to communicate outside of these silos. As I just talked about, the absolute need for prevention, and we need to, as a society, be reducing how we normalize violence in films, in media, in the public, in how we talk. And then this whole idea of compliance versus sincere engagement. So some of you or many of you may have experienced this when you're working with individuals who are maybe just going along with the motions of what they think they're supposed to do, as opposed to, being able to truly engage, to develop relationships, and to really understand, the supports that how these supports can be helpful for them. Uh, I mentioned that we had some interviews, so I will skip forward here again. So this is my fabulous research associate. Because we only had 3 participants, she put together, to analyze this data in a different way, a composite character. So I thought that was really interesting because the idea with this is you want to reflect the reality of the information that our survivor participants were providing us, but providing as much anonymity as possible because this is really sensitive information. And even in a place like in the cities within Saskatchewan, it's so sparsely populated. And because there were so few participants, we just didn't want to identify anybody. Um, Fortunately, our survivor participants had enough similarities in experience and circumstance that we could kind of put together a bit of a cohesive narrative. So they call this kind of empirical fiction, but really our findings did really, reflect the experiences of all 3 of our survivors. And then I am aware of the time, so I am just going to quickly show you. I asked her to put together this systems mapping. This was not a part of our initial analysis plan, but it was about 4 times as complicated as this, and I told her she had to fit it on one particular slide. And so when you have the opportunity to look at these slides, just, you can go through and just see how we mapped out how this all works together, the multiple systems, and some of the quotes that we had from our survivor participants that are really compelling. So things like, because of how they were raised, they didn't understand IPV, didn't understand course of control. Just, frustrations with the child protection system and in really that development of distrust in the system. And then this silo effect that I was just talking about, these really disconnected systems that we see here. And so our study conclusions are really here again. We found it in the survey data and we found it in our interviews with survivors, is this need for, being able to collaborate across sectors, building relationship, it's huge. Take that, nothing's so urgent unless it's a 911 call that we can't take some time to build relationship. Pushing for policy reform and not recommendations that sit on a shelf. Harm reduction, prevention, training, empowerment, and collaborative community engagement. So I just wanted to throw these in. So I'm going to show you here. We're really excited. So my research associate actually was the first author on this study, this manuscript publication that was just published in Child Protection and Practice. So I just wanted to highlight this as a source that you could find in preprint online. And she actually she redid the graphs to be a little to spread them out a little bit so that we can make a little bit more sense of them in this publication. I want to refer you just to the webpage that I was discussing earlier about the study we did. So Resolve at the University of Manitoba, just amazing information on this site that talks about, this particular project and our findings across the country. And then I did a quick little podcast with called Resolving Violence that gets into, again, a little bit more detail about the study and areas that I wasn't able to get into today. So again, I want to thank you so very much for being with me today, for carving out this time. I'm sure you're all so busy to learn and hopefully to share a little bit more about this incredibly important topic. And I welcome questions here in the chat. I believe Jackie's going to do some moderating. And also, if you would like to reach out, my email address and the email address of my research associate are here. We'd love to answer any questions that you may have. And as I said to Jackie, I will emphasize with you that, I have some expertise in this area because of practice and research, but so many of you here today will have very, also incredible depth of expertise. And I would absolutely love to have you respond to some of the questions and to contribute to a richer discussion. Thank you. I will stop
Thank you.
sharing.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. I just I can't wait. I have to go and watch the recording because I'm trying to watch the
Oh,
chat and all these other things, but I have so many notes already. I just am so, so grateful that you were here and you shared all this amazing information. We don't have a lot of questions, but one of the questions we do have is where can people find bystander intervention training? Do you have any information on that?
I do not. Um, I can find it. I know that it's an element of some of the, school education programs. So, for example, the like peer violence related and safe and supportive relationship training that happens in a lot of the schools does include that as a big part of it. What I can do is absolutely look into this a little bit more and provide the information along with the slides when they're sent out. So anything that we can't get to today due to time or that questions that I am not in a position to answer today, what I can do is I can find the responses to these because I know it's frustrating when people say they'll get back to you and they don't. I will include that information when the slides are provided to our attendants today.
Great. I do just see in the chat, Jody shared that the YWCA does buy standard training, or they used to. So if someone here has a link on how to, yes, somebody else is saying they do. So if
Oh, I
someone
love
wants to
that. It's
share a
called
link,
Upstander. It's called Upstander
Upstander.
program. That
Oh,
is
thank
that
you.
is fabulous. I will start changing. See, this is why I love this collective expertise and wisdom within this room. I will start to change how I refer to that, or at least include that as a reference.
Great. And it also looks like Mennonite Central Committee, MCC in Saskatoon, does training as well. And so, great. There's a video link here, so I'll be sure to include that. I will be forwarding the recording to everyone along with the slides, and then any of the links that have been shared in the chat, I will be sure to have those as well. I just really appreciate all of the information that you shared. Because we're from the ECT, that's who really wanted this webinar to happen. I just really want to extend extreme gratitude for you talking about how the early years, how critical that is. And I had never heard, but of course, it made complete sense when you said about uh, when children are exposed to violence or involved in violence, what area of their brain is developing at that time is most affected. Just really hit me hard actually on that one. So, but I also really appreciated how you talked about those treatment approaches and shared that there is hope and we know that we have so many great people and so many people are here today, but we know so many other people as well are doing this important work in helping our children, but ultimately helping our whole entire society. And so I really appreciate you bringing all of this to our attention and talking about resilience. And I agree, we have the T word and the R word, but the way you put that into perspective again was extremely helpful. So many thanks in the presentation. Not a lot of questions. Just wait a second here. Someone was asking if you know anything or anyone else in the audience here where art or child therapy training is offered. Does anyone have information on that?
Well, I mean, there's so many, and again, please in the chat if you have specific trainings that you're aware of. So being in the academic world, I'm not as close with the practice world, but there are so many different approaches. What I can tell you is that each requires significant training in their own right. So we see some people graduating and just going out and calling themselves therapists, which is dangerous and concerning to me. These trainings are offered in a multitude of environments, whether it's through university or college institutions, online training programs, in-person training programs. So it really depends on the type of approach. But you can look in your area and just see what's available. There are a multitude of them. But again, just to really impress that we can be really skillful. As a child protection worker, I didn't profess to be a therapist. My goal was to better understand the family situations, to provide intervention, but to refer to people who are specialized. So I think that is really, really critical, that we make sure that we're highly trained and highly comfortable when we're working with these very vulnerable individuals, especially children that come to us.
Another question we have here is, do you have resources that we can share with families who may be experiencing IPV?
Sure, yes. I mean, some of the ones that I was pointing out today, but yes, I can go through. I know PAPS has a bunch, Western Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. I work with the McGill Center for Research on Children and Families. I'm the chair at the Child Trauma Research Center. We have a bunch of resources. So again, I can compile a list of and the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. I mean, we're just getting better and better at compiling and synthesizing all the stuff that's out there into really accessible material that can be taken up by families, even by workers. As a worker, I didn't have a lot of time to read. So there are tons of information briefs and things that you can share with people that have, accessible language. And so really, I'm sure there are thousands, but what I can do is just, as I said, give a list of kind of the main centers for child development and responding to trauma.
Pretty fantastic. Thank you. Another question we have is, if you had a client who was a survivor of IPV with children involved and CFS was unable to see, notice, acknowledge the course of control by the abuser, how might you manage it?
Well, it's interesting because I'm, out of the role of being a worker, but I absolutely understand the frustration here. So, on the one hand, we talk about child protection, becoming involved in families' lives, and maybe at times that they shouldn't. On the other hand, one of the survivors here had to beg for child protection to open a file because of the damage that was occurring within the home for herself and her children. And they wouldn't do it because they didn't know the physical violence that, as I mentioned, is usually the piece that grabs the most attention. I would say just to keep trying, keep pushing. We are getting better with it. You can say the Divorce Act in Canada includes coercive control as illegal. And as I mentioned, other countries in the world are actually considering it a crime. It is more difficult to prove, but I think documenting better understanding, sharing those understandings with helping professionals can really be helpful. It's a form of emotional and psychological abuse as well, just to frame it that way. So honestly, having to be your own advocate is what I would say, and perhaps trying to seek supports through community organizations that can also act on your behalf, or compel child and family services to get involved if that's the area that you feel that would be best for the family.
Okay, yeah, I think that some whoever it's an anonymous
Mhm.
attendee, but they just said file is open, children are in care of the abuser.
Oh,
So I think that's linked to the same
oh, I'm so
question.
sorry if I
No,
misunderstood that, but
no, they just added it.
regardless, yeah,
Yeah.
regardless, pushing for the I hate using the word damage. I should be careful with the word damage, but the grave impacts that we see from all of these areas of course of control. So I would actually just, I talked about those information sheets. I would find out everything that you can about about the characteristics of course of control and really put those forward as let's call it evidence of the severity of the experiences. And one of the things that I didn't get to that we usually get to when we talk about the survivor findings in our study was just like this. It's so much can happen in abusive situations. So for example, head traumas that can decrease one's capacity to make good decisions. Very, very common is traumatic brain injuries. Just being within the system, being forced into these challenging areas where the survivors blamed, children are removed, income supports are removed, yet you have to show that you have, proper housing to have your children come back. I mean, it's just it's still such a system that heavily shifts blame and expectations towards the survivor, the victim survivor. And so again, I think it's just critical for us to just really be working together to better understand how intimate partner violence impacts us in so many ways that can actually even often reduce the credibility of the survivor victim in ways that leads to more issues in court and with child protection down the line. So again, I'll refer you to that paper that we just wrote because it really gets a lot more into these areas, which I think are just critical, especially for those who practice in the child welfare world.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time. I know we could probably keep going. Thank you again for taking your time. Thank you to everyone that participated. Just an overwhelming response, and we really appreciate all that all of you do to help children ultimately and our society become better and just have these important conversations. When you close this Zoom link, you should be getting a link to a survey. It's an anonymous survey. We always appreciate your feedback, and it definitely helps us planning new events. I'm just putting in the chat, we do have some future webinars. Not everything is linked yet, but there is definitely things coming up that we really hope that you'll be able to join us in the future on topics that definitely are to help children thrive. I loved what you said about moving from that surviving to thriving, and that's where the
Mhm.
Prevention Institute really focuses. That's actually one of our mandates is to really help children thrive through the work of primary prevention, which you mentioned, and the promotion of well-being. So extremely grateful for you being here, Lise, and for all of you. And I hope you all have an amazing day. And I will send out the
Yes.
recording and the slides in the next couple of days. It just takes us a couple of days to get it ready. So
And I'll get that extra information attached if I can. So
thank you
within that
so
time as
much.
well. Thank you so much for having me, Jackie. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for all of those who attended today. I really, really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone. Take
Bye-bye.
care.